Welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and this podcast is designed for anybody that wants to become a solo performer or maybe become a more successful solo performer by avoiding a lot of the pratfalls and mistakes myself and many of my contemporaries have made. I've got over 50 years of live performance experience, and I'm going to include the information I've learned as well as things that I've learned from other working pros to help you make this actionable and enjoyable. And if you like what we do, please share it. Today I have a longtime friend, a great musician, a great entertainer who's made several different moves in his career, which I'm really delighted to talk about. My good buddy, David Fortune. David, welcome.
Hello, Riley. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are things in South Texas, my friend?
Extremely hot.
Yes, that's why I'm wearing the Hawaiian shirt today, because I think it's going to be 106 here in Frisco, Texas, and we're about 20 minutes north of downtown Dallas, as you know, and you're way down almost to Mexico, right?
Well, I can almost see the border from where I am. And
Wow.
I have on a Hawaiian shirt today because that's the only thing that I wear since I moved down here. I'm a few miles away from South Padre Island and a few miles away from SpaceX. And down here, when people want to get really dressed up, they put on a black Hawaiian shirt, and that's considered dress wear.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So I've got so many questions, I almost don't know where to begin. A little background for those folks that don't know you or me. David had actually taken guitar lessons with me many years ago when he was doing a Willie Nelson show called The Other Willie. And he's had opportunity over the years to play a wide variety of types of events, types of locations, bands, solo, and he's changed his solo act recently, which I've also done. And so we'll talk about reinvention a little bit later, but let's begin at the beginning. First of all, why does a nice guy like yourself get mixed up with the guitar and singing anyway?
It goes, well, the same reason that most of us did. After going to a number of dances when I was a teenager, I noticed that all the girls liked the guitar players. And I thought, well, hey, let's see. I've got one hobby already, and that's cars. I can use a second hobby, and that's girls. And so I decided it was time to learn how to play the guitar. So a buddy of mine and I sat down and we taught ourselves and each other how to play. Neither one of us were very good, but we were good enough to get gigs. The first band I had when I was 16 years old turned out to be our school dance. We didn't know they were going to have 800 people there. We thought there might be 100 kids show up. Turned out to be 800 people. And we were all as nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, but we did just fine. Found out it was just great. And then later in life, and by the way, they applauded. And at the end of the evening, they gave us money. Years later, I went out and tried golf, embarrassed myself all day long. Nobody applauded, everybody laughed. And at the end of the afternoon, it cost me a lot of money. So I decided guitar was much better than golf and been doing it on and off ever since.
I have an old friend named Dan Henderson, and he was a DJ for many years. He did voiceovers for many years, and his youngest son was involved in golf when we became friends in the late 90s. And he asked me one time, he says, "Riley, do you golf?" And I said, "No." He said, "Good, don't start. It's expensive and frustrating and costs a lot of money." And I said, "Dan, I'm a musician. I don't have a lot of money, and I don't need any more frustration in my life." So that was the end of golf and me.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, first of all, where did you grow up? Are you from Texas originally?
No, I'm not. I'm from Wichita, Kansas originally,
Okay.
which no one knows where that is. So I always tell people Kansas City. Oh, okay. They know where Kansas City is, but Wichita is exactly in the Midwest. I grew up in a suburb there, typical Midwestern town. In those days, the only thing going on was bands, and we did the same thing that everybody else did. It's called four-walling it. We would go rent a hall, plaster posters all over the place, get our friends to do, well, there was no security in those days, get our friends to take tickets and all that. And we had a little tour going up around the area there. So
That's incredible. So when you started playing the guitar, what kinds of music were you doing, and how did you learn it? You mentioned you had a friend. Did you get like a Mel Bay book or something like that to just do it, or how did that work?
well, really, we got a Mel Bay book, which was too complicated for us. We couldn't understand it. So we sat down with the record player. And this is so long ago. We sat down with the record player. We'd pick out the songs we liked from the radio, buy the record, put it on, listen to it for about 10 seconds, lift the arm up and figure out what they were doing, which would take an hour. And then we'd put it back down and go to the next section. And we just kept doing that. Oh, I think we started when we were 13 or 14. And what actually motivated me was watching Ed Sullivan. And I'm a few years older than you. So I was there. I was 13 years old the night that Ed Sullivan had the Beatles on.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Everybody just went nuts over them. And I thought that really looks terrific. In fact, I had tried guitar lessons before that with the neighborhood guitar teacher, and he loaned me a guitar, but the action was terrible. The strings were rusty. It was horrible. It made my fingers bleed. And after a couple of weeks, I just said, I don't think I can do this. But I watched Paul McCartney playing that bass, and I thought, aha, there's only 4 strings there, and they look a lot fatter than those guitar strings, because I didn't realize I was playing a terrible guitar. I thought they were all that bad. And so I went and bought a nice bass. And in fact, I've still got it. That's a 63 Gibson. And bought that, started learning to play that. He started learning to play guitar. And so we sort of learned together. And for a number of years, I primarily played bass because I was so much better at it than guitar. But we were just learning and teaching each other, and it was all completely self-taught. And what we would do is we had a little cheap tape recorder. We would record ourselves, and when it sounded more or less like the song, we'd say, okay, we can add that one to our list. It was very long and hard. Wait, it's a hard way to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me ask, by the way, note to self, don't record any more podcasts on Tuesdays when they're picking up the garbage outside. So were you, I know that you've sung and you're an excellent singer. Did you do that from the very beginning with the bass?
Some, but on a lot of songs, it was really hard because for whatever reason, it's much harder to play bass. And you could probably explain that to us all, but it's much harder to play bass and sing than it is to play guitar and sing.
Yes.
And it's something to do with the syncopation. So I did some singing, but there were some songs I just simply couldn't do, and somebody else had to sing them.
Absolutely. I get that. And of course, playing and singing is a challenge anyway, under the best of circumstances.
Yeah, yes, it is.
So let me ask another question. The very first gig you guys ever have, the very first gig, you have 800 people. And yes. I know you and I both have played for less than 800 people at a time. But you told me something during our lessons years ago that I have never forgot. It's always stuck with me. Because you were thinking about, well, gosh, if I can play for 800 people the first time, I probably have a shot at this. And you said that you talked to your dad about this, and he mentioned something about feeling lucky. Can you talk about that?
Well, Dad was wanting me to be an engineer or something useful and productive. And he was a product of, he was a teenager during the Depression. And although we had a ranch and a farm outside of Wichita, they never missed a meal, but he remembered the Depression distinctly. So he thought everybody needs some sort of a useful trade or profession. And he didn't consider music or guitar playing either one of those things. And his advice to me when we were talking about it was, okay, can you control how good you are? Because the guys that you're listening to on the radio and buying their CDs, they're really good. Can you control how good you are? And I said, well, yeah, if you take enough lessons and you practice enough, you can improve and, do all that and get as good as they are. And he said, okay, that's great. Can you control how lucky you are? And I said, no, that's impossible. And he said, right. And he said, those guys have 2 things going for them. Number 1, they're really good. And number 2, they're really lucky. They're in the right place at the right time with the right people and got to know the right people. And that's called luck. And he said, what if you're not in the right place at the right time? And interestingly enough, Joe Walsh is my age and is also from Wichita. He got lucky. He moved to, I believe it was Cleveland, and he got lucky and he took off with the James gang. But Dad really made an impression when he said, can you control how lucky you are? Because sometimes when that first band would go out, we would get huge crowds, and other times we were playing to each other. We'd spend a bunch of money renting a hall and doing all that, and no one shows up because there's something else going on somewhere else. So he said, my advice to you, and he compared it to golf. He said, music is like golf. It's an absolutely wonderful hobby, but it's a rough way to make a living. And he said, if you're not lucky, it's going to be really hard, and that's going to be a long road. He said, why don't you get a profession that you can rely on for income and then do the music as a hobby? Because he said, you can do it as a hobby your entire life. Whereas if you're doing it full time, he said, you're going to burn yourself out. And what if you're not lucky? Because, of course, as a kid, I was assuming I would be lucky, like everybody does. And he kept saying, but what if you're not? So I decided he's probably got a good point there. And I went and got a college degree. Now, in your case, your degree was in music, and you didn't get luck. You did a lot of hard work, and you've been able to make a living with music. But I had no intentions of getting a degree in music, because music theory absolutely stumped me. I just, I could not connect with it. And so instead I went and got a degree in business, and I had a nice career. But my hobby on and off was always music, always playing in bands.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. First of all, I think your dad probably, I think this information is good enough to have a TED talk about it, because there are a lot of times that people want to take a hobby and turn it into a profession. And you're right, it is a lot of hard work. But I think that also was incredibly wise on dad's part, and also incredibly wise on your part to get the degree and do what you've done. But let's talk about bands for a moment, because I know you told me some very interesting stories about traveling from here in Texas when you were in the Dallas area to places like Chicago and things like that. So talk about bands and kind of what prompted you to start leaning towards the solo act portion of the show.
Well, I found out when I was a kid, I figured out pretty quick, probably by 18 years old, I knew that whoever owns the PA system and whoever owns the van to haul that PA system, because as you well know, they used to be huge. We're all using these nice Bose sticks and all of that now, and they're light and the sound is fabulous. But those great big old Electro Voices and JBLs were gigantic. It took 4 guys to lift one of them, and you had to have a van to haul it in, because you simply could not get them in cars. They were too big. So what that did is that always made me the leader of the band, because I usually owned the PA system and had a van to haul it in. Well, now as the leader of the band, it's sort of like being married to 5 other people at once. All of their problems are your problems. So when they have problems at home, it's your problem. When their car breaks down, it's your problem. You got to go get them, because that lead player or drummer or whoever it is, you've got to have them with the band. You simply can't do it without them. And if they're sick, God forbid, then you've got to scramble and find somebody who can fill in for them and do a halfway decent job. And but back when you and I were, in our 20s, there was no alternative. There was no recordings. We didn't have any of that. You had to have a live person there doing the job with you and for you. And that things happened like, somebody would get hurt at work, break a leg. Okay, they're out of it for 6 months. They can't play. One of the other guys runs off with someone else's wife. Well, now he's out of the band. You can't have him around. And all of those issues made bands difficult, but it was just part of the job, because there was no way of getting around it. You had to do it. And it was the same, and it didn't matter whether you're 18 or 20 or 52. I had set up a really great gig at a big venue. Everything's going perfect. We were doing a lot of Hotel California and a lot of songs that had long extended leads in them. And my lead guitar player gets a call from his corporation that says, and he had a really good job with some big corporation. They said, everyone has to be at corporate headquarters Friday morning. Anyone who is not there doesn't have a job. Well, Friday night, we had that huge gig, and it was a big deal. He could not go, because this was a career job, and he was had excellent income and a wonderful life. He had to go. And he got notice the evening before. They said, go get in the airplane right now. So now I'm scrambling, trying to find a lead player who can play all of his parts, trying to think, can we do it without him? And so I went over and talked to the venue owner, and he said, look, when I came and saw you guys, I hired you because of your overall sound. If you're going to have to do it without a lead player, he said, let's just cancel. Well, so we had to cancel. And of course, he never ever hired us again. There was no chance with that. We were finished because he had decided that we were unreliable. And unfortunately, he told a lot of the other venue owners as well. So that really did hurt us. So whether you're 18 or 52 or 62, it doesn't matter. When you have a band, you have everyone else's problems. Now, I will tell you something. I'm 72 years old. Here's what happened to me recently. And I don't know if I told you this on the phone or not.
Yes, I want you to share this because for those folks that are in bands that are contemplating going solo, this might give you additional ammunition to consider coming to the solo side of the fence.
Okay.
So yes,
Well,
please.
this was 2 or 3 years ago. I had put together a really good band because we only live a few miles away from South Padre Island, which is a resort island. The only thing they've got there's condos, hotels, and outdoor bars, but they're not dive bars. They're really nice places. So, and they don't charge any kind of a cover. So they're packed all the time. They've got a lot of people in there. We had this beautiful place, one of the nicer places that we were playing. And I'd put together a band with a friend of mine that lives at the same retirement resort that I do, playing bass and guitar, had a keyboard player and a great drummer. In one of our shows at our favorite place, the keyboard player had a stroke. And so the
Wow.
show was over. We're now rushing him with the ambulance into the emergency room and had to stick around because he had no family around. The only one was his wife. And she had to make some serious medical decisions. Not at a show, but a few months later, he survived. He came back and he was 99% as good as he had been before. Thank God. My drummer, who had also been my drummer in the Willie Nelson tour, had a stroke at home, and he's never played again. And then the other guy ran off with someone else's wife, and I'm not making this up. Now, you'd think by our age we'd be finished with that foolishness, but that was the same thing that happened to me when I was 25 years old. And it's like, oh my God, this never changes, except instead of falling off a ladder and breaking their leg, band members are now having strokes. This is just too much trouble because I've gone to a lot of trouble putting that band together, and we did tons of rehearsals so we would sound good. And all of a sudden, now here I am by myself and starting over again down here.
That's unbelievable. Hey, let's face it, the last thing you want to do at the end of a gig when you should be packing up is to take a member to the hospital for a stroke. I mean,
Yes.
that's no laughing matter. One of the other things that before we move on to you doing solo stuff now is that I know you were doing a Willie Nelson tribute here for a while, and you were doing a lot of travel with that. That was the thing that kind of stunned me. And we're not talking about going to Durant, Oklahoma, which is a mile away. You were traveling to Chicago and places like that. How did you make all of that kind of thing work when, again, you've got the band, assuming that you've got the PA and you've got the vehicle, but that's arduous to do too, David.
Well, it is very, very hard. The good news was that we were trying to be an exact duplicate of Willie's band, and my agent and business manager and business partner, Bill Ware of the William Ware
Yes,
Agency in
yes, know
Dallas.
him well.
Yes, and you know him and known him for longer than I have. Everything had to be absolutely identical, so we couldn't have 25-year-olds in that band. It had to be a band of older guys because all of Willie's guys, most of them were and are older than me. So I had to have older band members. So fortunately, I was able to find the guys I needed that were retired so they could travel with me. That's the good news. We could travel and we could go out for 4 or 5 days or a week. The bad news is now what you have got, and what I did in that band was Willie has a big band and he's got a harmonica player. It's very hard to find. I don't care if you live in Dallas, it's hard to find a reliable harmonica player. He had a piano player. It's hard to find a good piano. It's that getting that many people together and traveling together, the more you add, the more complicated, difficult, and unreliable it comes. So I used the backing tracks for the harmonica and piano parts and quite a bit of the lead parts and the electric lead parts, and then had a bass and drummer that always traveled with me. And then sometimes I had a rhythm guitar that went as well. And
Kind of like Coldplay.
yeah, yeah. But the problem with that was now you've got 3 old men or 4 old men who are traveling from Dallas to Chicago to set up and do the show, tear down, go get a few hours of sleep, get back in. And I had a big band van that worked out really well, had captain seats and all that. So two could drive and two could sleep, but it wasn't that comfortable. And you don't really sleep when you're on the road. And so you got old men now they're setting this all up, doing the show, doing a 90-minute show, which is an exact duplicate of Willie's show. And we poured out the energy for the audiences. Then you've got to hang around with the audience for a while, sign autographs, shake hands and do all that. So they'll want to have you back. You know that you have to do that every week. And then you're packing up and leaving, a few hours of sleep and doing it again. So we would go to Chicago. And then the next night we would be in Rockford. Then the next night we would be in Mankato, Minnesota, and then someplace else. And then you got to turn around, and now you're 1,000 miles from home, and you got to turn around, and all these poor, worn-out old guys have got to drive back home again, rest up a little bit, and then go out and do it again, because Bill Ware was an absolutely fabulous agent, and he kept us as busy as we wanted to be. The other issue with that, if you're the owner of the band, and in my case, I was the primary character in the band, and we were dead ringer impersonators. All of my guys played the exact same instruments that Willie's band played. They had the same guitars, same basses, same everything, dressed and even looked just like the guys in Willie's band. Well, the problem with doing 5, 6, or 7 or 8 gigs in a row is it gets so expensive, because you got to put all these guys up in a hotel. And, guys don't mind sharing a hotel room, which we obviously had to keep costs under control. But the first time you say, hey, would you guys mind sharing a bed? Absolutely not. No. I went down to the front office and they said, there's extra rooms. Get me this room's only got one bed in it. Get me a separate room.
Yeah.
You have all the costs and all the expenses. And what would sometimes happen to me as the guy who had organized the whole thing is my band, I did pay them extremely well, because that's one of the things Bill taught me. He said, if you pay them poorly, they're going to be unreliable. If you pay them well, they're going to be very reliable. And they were. I never had anybody fizzle out on me. But all that expense, and then gasoline, depending on the price of gasoline, you out and do 7 or 8 shows in a row. You come back absolutely, completely exhausted and find out you really didn't make very much money. Everybody else did. Bill made money. The musicians made money. The hotels made money. The restaurants and gas companies made money. But I came home with not nearly as much as I should have had. So that's the risk there. And that's one of the drawbacks of doing it with the band. Now, we were extremely well paid because it was a full band, and Bill was able to get us gigs that I never could have got on my own, because of clients that had been clients of his for years, and he would guarantee them. And Bill was not a 15% agent. He was a 33% agent, because he really managed you, and he did get you gigs, and he would get me in places we would never get in on our own, and he would get 5 or 6 times as much money as I would have been able to get on my own. So he was worth every penny that he charged. But when you add all those things up, it's going through the back of my mind, I could go off and do a show by myself and end up with more money. Though, in fact, the ones I enjoyed the most with Bill were the fly out gigs. And that's when he would fly me to someplace. The client, of course, was covering all my expenses, and all I would take was my guitar and the backing tracks and do it solo by myself, because on those there was no expense for me. And so whatever we'd agreed to, they covered all my expense. And then, of course, I was paid. And those are the ones that I actually did the best on, because I didn't have, and I wasn't exhausted, because I wasn't sharing 1/4 of the driving. So
sure.
In fact, I have a friend that for a very short time, I played in his band, and he was telling me he's not world renowned, but he's got out 8 or 10 albums, and you can edit this out if you don't want it in there. His name was Jackson Taylor. He has since retired, but he told me, this was several years ago, that one year he made $250,000, and that when it was everything was paid for, he had $25,000 left over. And I said, Jack, you can make that much being a greeter at Walmart. And
Yep.
he said, I know. And he was exhausted. And he had ended up getting divorced because he was gone all the time. A couple of years before that, he had made $500,000 gross, and he had 50,000 left for himself. And he said, that's just not enough. And so he has now retired, and he doesn't travel anymore. And he lives in Denver, and he does some small gigs around there because he doesn't have all the expense and all the trouble.
Let's pause that right there. We're going to wrap up. This will be the first installment of our interview with David Fortune. Again, you've been listening to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson. If you like what we do, please subscribe, and don't forget to tell your friends. If you've got ideas for upcoming episodes, please contact me through the Band of One podcast page on Facebook. You can also email me directly through our webpage, which is guitarmadesimpler.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.